Hi, I'm Thom Ruhe of the Kauffman Foundation, on location today at the office of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. I'll sit down in a moment and chat with the co-author and architect of an exciting new entrepreneurship education program called the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program. This is Top of Mind. Gary, thanks for having us here today. Really nice new offices. Congratulations on that. I know it was a big move.
Thank you, Tom.
Before we share with the viewers, any detail yet on the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program, which we're very excited to be partners with Eli on, I thought we'd start really at the beginning, and that's talk a little bit about the plight or the state of entrepreneurship education in the country as it exists today. I know you certainly have taken a long, hard look at that. And it ostensibly became kind of the motivation to found the company in the first place. So, if you could, why don't you take us from your perspective on where you think entrepreneurship education is today?
So when we looked at the entrepreneurship education landscape, what we found essentially was there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of popular myths and common misconceptions about entrepreneurship, what it is, what's required to participate, and who can play. And I think that the conversation around entrepreneurship has been largely hijacked by the Silicon Valley narrative, right? The high growth entrepreneur, the young college kid comes up with a great idea in his college dorm, writes a business plan, gets somebody to invest it, they get some kind of venture capital investment, and they launch their new business, and it's sort of a rags to riches story. And I think these stories, they captivate our imagination. But when we looked at the research, we found that it's a very, very narrow sliver of the entrepreneur ecosystem. So what we found is that there's a visibility versus representation issue going on. That less than 2% of all new ventures ever receive institutional investment, be it angel, venture capital, or bank financing, at their inception. So we need high growth entrepreneurs. But in my opinion, there's way too much emphasis on high growth entrepreneurship. So what we found is, a lot of universities, college-based entrepreneurship education initiatives, they're sort of over-influenced by this high growth entrepreneur. And students are encouraged to come up with a great idea and write a business plan, do market research, and present this idea to an investor.
Pitch and plan, right?
It's the pitch and plan, or the plan and pitch approach to entrepreneurship. Again, high growth entrepreneurs are important, but the carefully planned venture-backed startup is by far the exception rather than the norm. The other problem with this emphasis on high growth entrepreneurship is that it's exclusive. That's a game that only elite athletes can really play. And this one-dimensional approach to teaching entrepreneurship, number one, doesn't accurately reflect the process, but the bigger problem, in my opinion, is that it's exclusive. And it precludes people from participating or being entrepreneurial because they don't understand what it takes, who can participate, and how the game is played.
That's a good point.
So the other thing we found is that, if you're not pushing high, the plan and pitch approach, as you referred to it, there's a lot of confusion between small business management and entrepreneurship. So what happens is, you see these programs, the small business development centers, SBA programs, community college programs, where they're teaching kids about small business management. And there's not much distinction between the skills around management that are being taught versus entrepreneurship.
Well, could you explain for the viewers how you see the difference between being taught management skills and what entrepreneurs actually do?
So that's a good question, Tom. So for example, if you want to start a business on Main Street, you don't have high growth aspirations, you just want to start a Main Street small business. And typically, students, participants in these type programs are asked to identify a need, documentedly do research around it, put it into a business plan, learn a little bit about marketing, learn about finance, learn about legal structures and these basic mechanical management tools around small business. Those skills are fine. They're important for managing an existing business that has customers, has employees. But they're not all that useful when it comes to discovering and validating an opportunity, which is how we define entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is not management. It is the opportunity discovery process, the validation process. Management happens before that. So when we looked at the landscape, we looked at all these entrepreneurship education programs at universities, community colleges, SBAs, all these NGOs, all these entrepreneurship education initiatives. They were doing one of two things. They were supporting high growth entrepreneurship, or they were teaching small business management skills. Here's the thing, Tom, that I find so interesting. When we looked at the research, we found that less than 2% of all new ventures get any kind of institutional funding. In fact, the median startup capital for an Inc. 500 company is somewhere around $10,000.
Well, you sure wouldn't think that's the case based upon what you see in the media, news reports, movies.
It turns conventional wisdom on its head. And we looked at the research, we found that the vast majority of entrepreneurs initially set out pursuing highly uncertain niche opportunities. The idea is not obvious. More importantly, the idea is not fundable. So the vast majority of entrepreneurs set out pursuing a highly uncertain, unfundable idea. They have very limited resources. They have all kinds of constraints.
So you've been very specific to point that out. Why is understanding that distinction so important?
So we looked at the research around the startup, and we found this is the environment. It's 40% of Inc. 500 founders had no experience in their field. They're not writing business plans, or if they are, it's on the back of a napkin or back of an envelope. They're not writing business plans. They're not pitching investors or going to banks for loans. They're scratching away in an iterative, experimental approach. They start where they are with who they know and what they have, and they just start into motion. And rather than doing all this planning and then executing, they plan and execute simultaneously. But back to your original question, Tom, when we looked at the ecosystem and we looked at the research and said, this is what entrepreneurs are actually doing. And what is being taught is largely divorced from the reality of how entrepreneurs actually discover and validate opportunities. So we said, if entrepreneurs are pursuing highly uncertain opportunities with very limited resources, lots of uncertainty, lots of constraint, yet somehow they manage to succeed, how are they doing that? And we couldn't find any meaningful curricula that address that. We found lots of curricula that showed you how to write a business plan and pitch an investor. We found lots of curricula that taught you how to manage a small business or figure out cost of goods sold or legal structures or marketing. But we couldn't find anything that addressed this phase of discovery, how entrepreneurs with limited resources manage to uncover opportunities. That's what we wanted to focus on.
Would you describe that as the essence of an entrepreneurial mindset?
I would, Tom, and I'm glad you asked that question because teaching students how to write a business plan and then pitch an investor, or a bank for that matter, is misleading. And what I mean by that is, first of all, again, when we look at the research, the vast majority of new ideas are not fundable. That doesn't mean that those ideas don't have validity. So what we need to encourage students to do, the other problem with that method of teaching is it leads the student to believe that the entrepreneurial process looks something like this. It's a moment of inspiration, an idea. Well documented, well researched, well presented, put forth to a funder who writes a check, and then the business is open, the pigeons are released, and the business succeeds. That's just largely divorced from reality.
You mean it doesn't work like that?
It does not work like that. And that entrepreneurial phase, the reason we picked Clifton Talbert's story around his Uncle Cleve in the ice house is to demonstrate that, Mark Zuckerberg is not necessarily the face of entrepreneurship. And part of what the Ice House program is designed to do is to remind people that the lack of resources and constraints create the environment that help you develop entrepreneurial skills. That's really what entrepreneurial thinking comes from the lack of resources and constraints.
Well, I'm glad you brought up, Clifton Talbert and the story behind the course. Perhaps this is a good segue point to talk about really what's in the course. How did you go about constructing it? What principles did you build it around? What rigor was put into creating the curriculum, and more importantly, how's it relevant today? For somebody that's taking it, whether that be the 18-year-old high school graduate to the 45-year-old, mother re-entering the workforce to, the retired, business executive who's looking to get back into business.
Sure. As I said a minute ago, Tom, we couldn't find any meaningful curricula that really spoke to how to survive with limited resources, lots of constraints in an uncertain, ambiguous environment. We couldn't find any curricula to address that. So we thought we're going to go out and we're going to create some curricula around this to understand this. And we went all across the United States, spent about 3 years interviewing entrepreneurs from all 4 corners of the country, all walks of life, not the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, what I like to call the unlikely entrepreneurs. Just people that started businesses with a few $1,000s or $5,000 or found themselves, they lost their job or tripped into a simple idea and turned it into a successful venture. So we interviewed about 300 entrepreneurs all over the United States and distilled their stories into a curriculum. That was the basis of the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program. That's the first thing we did. We took about 350 hours of on-camera interviews and distilled it into a curriculum. How are they doing what they are doing? How are they identifying opportunities that the rest of us seem to overlook? And how do they manage to marshal the resources to pull it off? They have just a few $1,000s or a few $100s, yet somehow they manage to marshal the resources. When I say that, I mean the internal fortitude as well as the external resources required. The second thing we did was we focused on the mindset. What are the fundamental beliefs and assumptions that are driving the behavior? We tend to shy away from a formulaic approach. It's not like becoming an engineer. It's not like becoming a Marine. When you get off the bus, you step in the yellow footsteps, and the next thing you know, you're a Marine. It's very iterative and experimental. So while there is no formulaic process, there is a fundamental logic, and this common logic or a mindset transcends socioeconomics, time, and circumstance. So what worked for you might not work for me, but I can understand the logic and I can apply it. So I equate the logic to a compass. There is no roadmap, but there's a compass. And it's that compass that can guide you when you're in uncharted territory. The third thing we did was we simply used technology to capture and convey the knowledge. So there are short video segments from the interviews so that the students can have the key learning objectives. They learn the key learning objectives are reinforced by the firsthand testimony of people they can relate to. Real entrepreneurs came from challenged circumstances, yet somehow managed to succeed. A big part of what Ice House is designed to do, Tom, is to transmit culture. You can write about this stuff in a book, but when you see the people talking and communicating what they did, where they came from, the struggles, the challenges they faced, and how they overcame them, that's transmitting, something's registering beyond the explicit knowledge that's being conveyed. The fourth thing we did was we used an approach called problem-based learning. So we encourage our students to work in groups. They can work alone, but they work in groups. It's problem-based learning. They identify a problem that's relative to them, and they're asked to go out into the world. They're asked to document their assumptions on a business model canvas. We call it an opportunity discovery canvas. So the students work in groups. They document their assumptions about a problem they can solve. And they're encouraged to get out of the classroom and go out into the world.
I want to stop you there for a second because I know this is a big point for you. You and I have obviously spoken about this before. Why is it that you see it as so important that the students, the participants in the course, get that external experience? You know, it's built into the fabric, if you will, that they have to take that canvas and go test their assumptions out in the real world. Why is that such a fundamental piece of this program?
So what we're really talking about is opportunity discovery. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, there are an infinite array of opportunities out in the world that are yet undiscovered. So in many cases, in the research that we uncovered, the original idea is completely wrong. Might not make any sense. But it's through this interaction with people out in the world that could possibly use your idea, your service, or your product. By interacting with them early and often, you start to learn and get feedback. So this problem-based learning approach encourages the students to fail very quickly, very often, and then to use that canvas to come back into the classroom and share what they're learning out there with their peers. So there's a peer-to-peer aspect of it, but it really fosters an experimental, iterative approach. The students are constantly asked to design very quick, cheap experiments to test their ideas, rather than write a business plan based on known facts. To test their idea in the real world. Our assumption is that by talking to potential customers or users of their product or service, they will uncover the true opportunity.
You know, the testing, you know, getting out there and getting the feedback, that's a well documented, and that applies even in that 2% that we spoke of earlier to, you know, the unlimited number that could participate in an Ice House program. You know, what works like that, you know, where we've learned, you know, whether it's blank canvas, whether it's minimally viable product, you know, who are some of the thinkers or the influencers that, you know, went into your thinking as we put this course together?
So that's a great question, Tom. Some of the research done by Amir Baideh, documented origins and evolutions of new business, was that really mapped what we saw when we went out and did our interviews. That matched, so we had this body of research that matched what we were finding out there with our camera interviews. Steve Blank's work at Stanford also promotes this rapid, prototyping. Use a canvas, get your ideas out into the world quickly. Don't really judge the idea at the beginning. A few fundamental questions, and get out of the building and go do what you're doing. So, but the point I want to make, Tom, is this: that drawing from the research from Baideh, the methodology that's coming out of Stanford with Steve Blank and Eric Riesen's methodology is really a life skill. That the Ice House program is really designed as a general education requirement course. It fits very well as an intro to entrepreneurship. But in my opinion, this is a mindset that every student needs. And what the course is designed to do is to expose students to fundamental entrepreneurial thinking, then immerse them in real-world, uncertain entrepreneurial experiences that will enable them to develop entrepreneurial skills. Like I said a few minutes ago, it's what you do when no one's coming to the rescue, when no one's in charge and there are no rules. That's what will make you into an entrepreneur.
So I appreciate that you brought up, you thinking that this should be a general education requirement. And no surprise, we would agree with you. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Kauffman Foundation partnered with Eli to bring this to bear. And we launched this exciting new program actually last year at the NACCE conference in Portland. We were back again this year in Chicago. Can you, for the viewers here of Top of Mind, share with them, so we're a little over a year now into the release of this exciting program. Can you bring us up to speed, how it's being deployed, where it's being deployed, what surprises, what have we learned since it's been out in the market? I mean, that's eating our own dog food, right? We're out there in the market now learning from our customer base.
The initial response to the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program has been overwhelming. Since its release last summer, the course has been widely embraced by people in the academic world. It's been widely embraced by people in the economic development world. And entrepreneurs themselves have endorsed it, have taken it. People that are already in, 45-year-olds that have been in business 20 years that have small businesses are taking this course. Phenomenal results. High school, Milton Hershey High School has just adopted the program. It's being taught at Stanford University through the SMASH Academy for high-achieving, low-income STEM students, high school students. It's being taught at Virginia Tech. It's being taught in community colleges and universities all over the world. There's universities in Colombia, in East Africa, in Guatemala, Canada are using the course. It really caught on very quickly.
And wasn't there even a municipal adoption of this program, a city that took it on as maybe a summer jobs program?
Yes. The Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher is an entrepreneur. He's a real deal Ice House entrepreneur. He recognized the authenticity of this curriculum, and last summer we put 400 kids through a summer work program, 16 to 21-year-olds. With great success. They've come back and said we want to do twice as many kids the summer of 2013. So that was really a great a testament to the impact of the course.
Well, that's somebody thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
Being an entrepreneur in a mayoral capacity you don't always think of.
Right. And it comes back to, when we originally launched this course, I thought we were making a course that was going to fit into the missing piece in the ecosystem of entrepreneurship. I thought we were creating a course to help people figure out how to identify opportunities in uncertain environments, lack of resources. The market actually came back to us. Large community colleges came back to us and said, this needs to be a general education requirement. Now, since then, here's what I've learned. I began to do some research on what education thought leaders are saying. And they've identified innovation and initiative, effective problem solving, communication, critical thinking as skills that every student will need moving forward in the 21st century. The Ice House Entrepreneurship Program fosters all of those skills by exposing students to entrepreneurial thinking, immersing them in entrepreneurial experiences that will enable them to develop critical thinking, creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship.
Well, that's fantastic. Where do you really see us going from here? I mean, now that this program is going out there and it's picking up speed and adoption pretty broadly, I mean, I know this is kind of a wild guess type question, but where do you see it going from here?
So, Tom, as we get this, continue to get feedback out in the market and people are asking us what's next, we're now in the early stages of developing a more advanced curricula to look at what do entrepreneurs need, what do they need to prepare them. And when I say entrepreneur, I just want to characterize that as someone who is going to be entrepreneurial. That you don't need to start a business to benefit from entrepreneurial thinking. So
that's an important distinction.
It's a very important distinction, and we can't keep these one-dimensional approaches that we're just going to teach high-growth entrepreneurship and small business management, those narrowly defined one-dimensional approaches just miss the power and the essence of entrepreneurial thinking. We've designed this as an interdisciplinary approach so that all students can be exposed to these fundamental aspects. And moving forward, we're now collaborating with a number of entrepreneurs and thought leaders to develop a more robust curriculum beyond Ice House to help develop and foster entrepreneurial skills.
Well, that certainly sounds exciting, and on behalf of the foundation, I'm pleased that we found each other to come together on this partnership. Hopefully, one entrepreneur at a time, we can change the world, because certainly we all know that we definitely need it. So thanks again for hosting me today, and again, congratulations on the wild success of this program.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it.